What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sitdown. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of the content in the comment section below. Also, if you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sitdown video. I also wanted to tell anyone that watches this video, if you enjoy mafia and crime content, please check out my podcast, The Sitdown, a crime history podcast presented by Barstool Sports, wherever you get your podcast. You can also, in the description of this video, click the link and find it that way. I promise you, you'll like the content. Let's get in, ladies and gentlemen, to another organized crime topic. And one thing that I've always been fascinated by are the little guys. The guys that we, as mob enthusiasts, know a little bit about, and some people don't know anything about. These are the men that keep these American crime families moving. These are the men that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s were the pillars of the American mafia, and they're the ones that allowed these groups to become some of the most powerful we have in this country. Today, we're going to talk about an individual that made his way up the ranks of the Gambino crime family. He's not known as a killer, but he's known as one of the most productive earners in the history of the family. And he also owned a little patch of real estate that would become very important in the 80s. The story of Joseph Joe the Cat LaForte. Next on Sitdown Shorts. Joseph LaForte was born March 28th, 1917, and grew up in the Italian enclave of Little Italy. He'd actually begin his life as a petty street thief. And it was said that Joe the Cat LaForte would actually gain his nickname, Joe the Cat, due to his feline-like way of leaping over buildings as someone chased him. Very interesting way of gaining a nickname. As we know, in Little Italy and Soho and all these other New York neighborhoods, all the homes and businesses are connected, and you can jump over and leap over things to get away from things. And he did that through rooftops. Pretty interesting. Growing up as a kid, Joe the Cat LaForte would also get involved in bookmaking and loan sharking and make his foray into the mafia. Actually, at one point, he became very close with Gambino heavyweight Neil Dellacroce, and they would be friends throughout their life. In fact, in the 50s, it was actually said that Joe the Cat LaForte would actually early on act as a chauffeur and driver for Neil Dellacroce. Now, interestingly enough, Joe the Cat LaForte was always very money-minded. He always realized that he could create revenue through real estate and big business. And not only was he very much involved with bookmaking and shylocking, what Joe the Cat LaForte did at a very early age is he bought property. As the great Tony Soprano said, buy land, AJ, gotta make it any more of it. That's exactly what Joe the Cat LaForte did. And pretty much what he was he would go into Little Italy, into Soho, into NoHo, into Chinatown, and he would buy up any real estate he could get his hands on. In fact, at one point, someone in Little Italy would say that he made a lot of money and didn't piss it away. He bought property in Soho in Little Italy when you could get it for a song, and he lived off of it the rest of his life. And that's exactly right. Not only was he buying property in Manhattan, but he was buying up property everywhere. In fact, at one point, he actually purchased a very well-known spot on Mulberry Street, a place seen here. He would buy all the apartments up and own every one of them, but he would also own this place, the Ravenite Social Club. It wasn't Carlo Gambino. It wasn't John Gotti. It wasn't Neil Dellacroce. The real owner of the building was Joseph LaForte. Now, Joe LaForte also did something very smart as well. Obviously, Joe the Cat was a bookmaker and loan shark. And what he did in the early 60s was he would actually move his family to Staten Island. Now, remember, back in the 60s, there was no Verrazano Narrows Bridge. That actually would not be constructed, the Verrazano Narrows, until 1964. And what happened was a huge swath of people from Brooklyn made the trek across the bridge into the farm towns of Staten Island. Joe the Cat was way ahead of them, though. What he did was he moved there, and ultimately would start being a bookmaker to farmers and business owners and things of that nature, and was making a ton of money for the Gambino crime family. He was close with Paul Castellano. He obviously knew Neil Dellacroce. He was very popular and knew a lot of people. At one point, he basically ran Staten Island for the Gambino crime family. Now, as we know, the books were mainly closed, but Joe the Cat LaForte would actually show up on FBI files really in the early 60s. It's alleged, though, that by 1976, Joe the Cat, in the first wave of inductions in the early part of that year, would become a made member of the Gambino crime family, sponsored by his longtime friend, Neil Dellacroce. Now, as I said, Joe was very involved with bookmaking, but he was also very much involved with real estate. He would eventually start to buy property in and around this area, New Dorp in Staten Island, New Dorp Plaza. He would basically put in a lot of the first strip malls and own the buildings that these businesses were in. Now, upon his induction into the Gambino crime family, who would be placed in the crew of Thomas Bellotti. Now, as we know with Joe the Cat LaForte, he's an old school guy. He's been around a long time. He makes a ton of money. But there's one thing that would be found out about Joe the Cat LaForte. According to former Gambino heavyweight and mob informant Sammy Gravano, he would tell of a story at one point in the 80s when he saw a very dark side of Joe the Cat LaForte. He would state that at one point, the son of Joe the Cat LaForte, an individual called James Buddy LaForte, would be inducted into the mafia. Upon his induction, his father, Joe the Cat, would give him allegedly $200,000. According to most people, and according to Sammy Gravano, Mr. LaForte, the son, blew through all the money, and Joe the Cat was absolutely irate at one point. And he, at one point, supposedly, according to Gravano, went to Gambino crime family boss Paul Castellano to have his own son killed. But in fact, Castellano would decline that offer and basically talk Joe the Cat off a ledge. Also, at one point, Joe the Cat LaForte would also, quote, want to smash the face in of his other son, Joseph Jr. At one point, Joe Jr. allegedly tried to leap over his father and become capo of a crew run by Mike the Baker Calleja in the 80s. Now, Calleja was in cahoots with the young LaForte and was actually shelved for his behavior due to this. Joe the Cat did have a dark side. It wasn't very well known, but he has been known to want to do things to people, particularly his sons, who I think in his case really couldn't hold his jockstrap, quite honestly, and they were just trying to muscle in on him and his own turf. Joe the Cat LaForte, though, was building a fortune as far as money was concerned. And the thing about it wasn't millions. It was tens of millions. Like I said, Joe the Cat LaForte had real estate everywhere. And in fact, if you look at property records, there is still real estate, a lot of real estate in New Dorp, Staten Island, owned by the LaForte family. They have shell companies that run these businesses. They still have property in Little Italy. In fact, the LaForte family actually still own a building at 232 Mulberry Street, according to property records that I looked through. So, there is still a lot of stuff that the LaForte family owns, and a lot of it has to do with what Joe the Cat, the soldier in the Gambino crime family, did. Now, obviously, as we know, around the 85 time in the 1980s, John Gotti would take over as boss of the Gambino crime family. A lot of his operations were run out of the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, but they were also run out of the Ravenite Social Club. As we know, LaForte owned that building. Now, John Gotti, it was also alleged that at one point there was no love lost between Gotti and LaForte. Look, LaForte was an old-time guy. And by the late 80s, mid to late 80s, Joe the Cat LaForte had really gotten out of illicit business. He was basically just making tons of money through real estate. Now, according to him, Joe the Cat, he was told and had been in a situation where Castellano and Dellacroce never came at him for his real estate. They only took his illicit profits. Now, according to Sammy Gravano, at one point, John Gotti was very annoyed with the fact that Joe the Cat was not kicking up money or the money that he should be to John Gotti. John Gotti would scare him at one point and really kind of just demand that he pay him more money. John Gotti also was involved in a bizarre situation where in 1986, as we know, Gotti allegedly beat up an individual called Rommel Pajcik. He would be beat the rap for that charge, and the New York Post would put out an article on the front page with the quote, "I forgot it." We all remember that, right? Upon his dismissal for that case, John Gotti hosted this lavish celebration in Queens for beating the charge. Now, everyone showed up to this thing. Every friend of ours showed up. And John Gotti used it as a way to, celebrate and say, "Oh, look at me, I beat the rap, blah, 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 blah." One individual that did not show up was Joe the Cat LaForte. Now, according to the terrific book Mob Star by Jerry Capisci and Gene Mustaine, Gotti allegedly belittled LaForte for not showing up and paying homage. LaForte would respond with, quote, "You know I'm not selfish, John. You know I'm not selfish. You know it." Now, Gotti would respond, quote, "Joe, you're trying to tell me that everybody else, Angelo, Frankie, his uncle, Joe Gallo, all the 86th Street guys, all our people were there, Jersey people, all these guys are not as important as you. They run cities, they run towns, they run countries. You pick up the fucking Post to find out your fucking friend made out in court." So he basically belittled him for not showing up to this soiree after he beat the rap. Joe the Cat was an old school guy. He knew better. He knew better. That's why he didn't do any prison time, arguably, because he didn't show up to dumb things like this. Now, I do want to talk, though, about what subsequently would happen. John Gotti did not like Joe the Cat. At one point, in fact, at multiple points on Wiretap, John Gotti would call Joe LaForte, quote, "a heartless motherfucker," multiple times. They hated each other, from what I understand. And look, I'm sure at some point, John Gotti did like maybe the money that he kind of banished LaForte into giving him. But John Gotti would get back at Joe the Cat at one point. In 1987, an individual called William Ciccone allegedly shot at John Gotti as he left the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club. Now, down the road, we would find out that this was likely a truck backfiring and that William Ciccone didn't actually shoot at John Gotti. Ciccone was a Yonkers, a man who lived in Yonkers. He was this carpenter, loner kind of guy. And I guess allegedly he was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. The Gambino group thought that he shot at John Gotti. Gotti allegedly had people run after him and had Joe Watts basically take him to a building and killed him. They would actually dump the body of Ciccone inside a sweet shop in Staten Island owned by Joe the Cat. In fact, the New York Daily News would write a piece that Joe the Cat was actually being sought for questioning as to why a body showed up in his business. Many people had to believe that it kind of was payback for not showing any respect to Gotti. And no one really has ever been brought to justice in that William Ciccone murder. We'll never quite know if he actually did shoot at John Gotti, but it is probably unlikely. Joe the Cat, by 1990, would actually get arrested at one point for perjury and spend a short time in prison. His release would actually come in late 1990. Joe the Cat would eventually just live his life in relative anonymity. He would have to deal, though, with the government on one piece of pressing business. In 1993, as we know, after Gotti and his cohorts went to prison for life, the federal government would actually seize the Ravenite Social Club and the apartments above it. Joe the Cat contended he would fight this case, but he never ultimately would. And it would be sold in the late 90s for a little over $1 million. As we can see, there were all sorts of apartments above it and had probably good residual income for Joe the Cat. He knew, though, it was probably better off not fighting the government. He had enough money. He was ready to just let it go. As we know now, the Ravenite Social Club is a shoe store that has been converted. I have to say, if I'm the owner of that building, I probably would have different ideas for it. But I guess if you're ever in New York, maybe you go check it out and give that lady a little business. Now, Joe the Cat, seen here with his wife, would, as I said, spend most of his life in relative anonymity, living off of his real estate proceeds. He could be seen in the 2000s and 2010s being whisked around to his many businesses that he had as far as real estate was concerned. And he had a driver that would drive him into the New York Plaza every day. And he tried to stay busy. Now, his sons, as I said, did follow him into that world and are involved in that life still, as far as I know. But they are quite old as well. Joe the Cat LaForte would actually pass away in 2016 at the age of 99 years old. He is buried in Staten Island, not far away from another old timer in the Gambino crime family, James Jimmy Brown Failure. There's one thing we can say about Joe the Cat LaForte. He was an absolutely gigantic earner. He made a ton of money. He very much spent little prison time inside, and he set up his family for life. As I said, the family still runs a real estate holding company that still has tons of real estate that they're making money off of today. Now, interestingly enough, I did want to end this with a very interesting story about Joe the Cat LaForte's family. This individual, Joe LaForte, is actually the grandson of Joe the Cat. His father, as I said, is a mobster. And from what I understand, in 2020, Joe LaForte would actually be arrested by the federal government after a company he created called Par Funding was called basically a Ponzi scheme. Now, Joe LaForte, seen here, would actually spend time in prison for a $14 million real estate scam and for running an illegal gambling operation. At one point, he would create this company out of Philadelphia called Par Funding. And Mr. LaForte allegedly issued $600 million in loans to small businesses. And what he did was, through about 1,200 different investors, he would basically make the claim that there was just a small payday loan company and that he was a good man and he could put their money to work and make them money back. Now, he did not disclose to them that he was a convicted felon and spent time in prison. So the SEC would jam him up on that as well. He would also state at one point that he was actually sending individuals around to do his loan collections. According to a business article written by Bloomberg.com, they would come into contact with this individual, Gino Gioia. Now, this guy says that he was a loan collector for Joe the LaForte for a long period of time. At one point, basically, he was told to go demand that these loan places that get a loan pay their money back. LaForte allegedly threatened a merchant saying, quote, "Have you ever heard of cement shoes?" He would also tell her, quote, she would start her car engine and poof if she didn't pay him. Another merchant would also tell the FBI, according to court papers, that LaForte threatened to take away all the merchant's assets for failure to make a loan payment. He allegedly said, "Stop trying to fuck me. I have you and your son killed." She also said that a large muscular man appeared uninvited at their place of businesses, threatening them with physical harm and demanded money for LaForte and his loan company. Now, the FBI would also release a recorded conversation involving LaForte and an undercover FBI agent that was recorded in July of 2020 regarding the fact that Joe had weapons at his Pennsylvania home. Quote, "You know I've got rifles. I've got AR-15s. What do you want, bro? Come on. We've got everything. AR-15s. We got sawed-off shotguns, rifles. We've got, I don't know. What do you want? We've got gun rooms up there. Yeah." Now, Joe the Cat LaForte is out on bail, and a pending trial is still coming up as far as I know. But the apple does not fall far from the tree when it comes to the LaForte family. Joe the Cat had grandkids. They get into the criminal world as well. They probably should just live off their real estate. But as always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. A look into a very interesting individual, Joe the Cat LaForte, who will live into his 90s and almost 100 years old. The properties that he once had are still owned by his family. A good way to go out when you're in the mafia. As always, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you never miss another sit-down video. We'll see you next time.